PaperZD is a plugin for Unreal Engine, adding animation, graph, and notify support for flipbook animations in 2D projects. It's a free plugin, and basically, if you're working with a 2D game and flipbook assets, it's a must-have. Just absolutely get it. Just go to the marketplace, install to engine, and then within Unreal Engine, under Edit, Plugins, make sure the checkbox for PaperZD is checked and restart your Unreal Engine if necessary. Once you've got it set up, you have to set up your flipbooks the way you normally would, but once your flipbooks are in place, you have the sprites and other assets set up, you right-click, there's a new area added to your right-click menu, PaperZD. You want to create an animation source. This manages all of your flipbooks. In here, add new, add an animation. This one we'll call idle, and set the animation. And then add another animation for run, etc. And just go through and add all of your flipbooks in here. And this is where you manage them. As you can see, the animation is playing out for you. Save that. Close down. Once you have your animation source set up, then the next thing you want to set up is your character or pawn. Now, at this point, there are 3 different ways to go about this, depending on whether or not this is a fresh project that you're doing from scratch, or whether this is an existing project that you're adding PaperZD into. So first thing I'll cover is if this is a fresh project. So in a fresh project, you simply go up to Blueprint class and look for PaperZD character. As you can see, it's the same as a Paper 2D character with the added animation component for PaperZD. Now, for the animation component, down here under Details, you need to select your animation instance class. Which actually I haven't set up yet. So I already got them out of order. So you also want to set up under PaperZD Animation Blueprint. Now it is vitally important when you create your animation blueprint that you select the proper animation source, because once you've selected it, you can't change it. And I've learned the hard way that you can put a whole lot of work into setting up a very elaborate animation blueprint and then lose all of that work because you have it associated with the wrong animation source and you have to delete it and start over from scratch. So verify this animation source that you just created is the animation source that you select. So now in the character, under animation component details, PaperZD animation instance class, we select the correct class, and that character blueprint is now properly set up. Now, if you have an existing character, so I'll create one from the standard paper class. You've got 2 options on how you want to go about it. One is if you're just using the standard paper class, you haven't made any modifications to the class or inherited from another paper class that you created, anything along those lines, you can just go under class settings, and somewhere in here, find it. Oh, where is it? Parent class. Change it to PaperZD character, and it will automatically add in the animation component for you. And then under the animation component, we set our animation instance class, and it's ready to go. Now, if you are using a a derivative paper character. So you've made changes to the class, or it's a child of a parent class and modifications have been done or something. And so you can't change the class settings. You can still do it. So let's delete this one. And we're going to create a new one. And we're going to pretend that this one is somehow modified the class. And so you can't just change the class. So all you have to do is go in here, manually add the animation component, PaperZD animation component, and then select it. And then under the animation instance class, you select your animation instance, your animation blueprint. And then under render component, open this up, pull down this arrow, and just manually type in the name of your sprite component, which is just sprite. And you're good to go. The other two methods for setting up or creating a PaperZD character, this component here automatically fills in. But because you're not directly you're not changing the class, you're not using the inheritance from the class, it doesn't automatically fill in. So you just have to manually fill that in. Other than that, it's ready to roll. Once you have your character set up, your animation source set up in your animation blueprint, under animation graph, simply pull out of this line, and we want to create a state machine. Just so you're aware, it is possible to have multiple state machines. And this would be, for example, if you've got a character that has multiple animation sets. An example I can think of off the top of my head is if you had like some kind of shape changing, like a werewolf character or a transformer or something along those lines, where it has completely different sets of animations to do the same thing. It has two sets of walking animations, two sets of idle animations, whatnot. You could set up multiple state machines. Most characters, most pawns that you're working with are just going to have a single state machine. In the case of multiple state machines, you would go, where is it here? Select animation by bool. And so you would have this state machine in there, and then you'd have a second state machine that would tie in there, and then some Boolean switch. If for some reason you had something ridiculously complicated, like you had, 5 different state machines, 5 different sets of animations for the same character, you could also do by integer. Where is it? Select animation by integer. And this would allow you to have as many different animations as you want, and then you just have some integer set to select which animation that you go to. We'll switch this back to just the one state machine. We don't need to get ridiculously complicated. We'll just call it state machine. And then in the state machine, you simply drag off of this default node and create your animation state, say like an idle state, for example. And then inside the output animation, you just say play idle. And that sets your idle animation. If you probably have multiple animation states. So do another one. This one will be like walk. And then to transition between them, you just drag an arrow in all directions that you want transitions to happen. So if you want to be able to go back and forth, and then the transition node here, you would have something like, well, you're going to need a reference to the character so you can check on the character. So if we go to event on init and we get owning actor and cast to, what did we call our character? just new blueprint 1. Is it new blueprint 1 or new blueprint? Oh, right. There's two of them. We'll get rid of one, remove that confusion. New blueprint. And then promote this to a variable. And let's call this owner. Okay, so now for our rule, we'll drag in owner. Get our velocity. And this rule is from idle to walk. So if our velocity is not, right, not equal to 0, then we transition. And then for the opposite transition from idle back to walk, we just do the opposite. Oh no, we want equal to 0 this time. Oh, actually, my mistake. We only want to be checking, since this is 2D, we only want to make sure that the x is 0. So go back here, we'll fix the other one as well. Wrong click. Okay. So this default is just something I want to clear up. This has caused some confusion for some people. A jump node, which allows you to just jump to any place in the animation graph without transitions. It looks the same as this default entry node. And this is something the developer will be changing. They aren't the same thing. You cannot jump to this node. I know, because I tried. So just be aware that although these look similar in this current version, it will be changed in the future. They are not the same thing. Jump nodes can be jumped to, and you can create as many as you want, name them whatever you want. This default one that says out, you can't change it. It will always be called out, and well, in future versions they might change it, but right now you can't change it, and it is not a jump node, so don't try and use it. So rather than transitioning back and forth by this method, if you want to be able to, regardless of what animation state you're in, you want to be able to jump to another animation, you can use a jump node. So for example, you can have one for if you're in the air. Let's call this in air. And from here, you want to create an animation state for jumping. And then from jumping, we want to create another animation state for falling. And then from falling, we want to return back down to our idle walk animation. So we can drag back to here. And the transitions for these would be the same thing as the transitions for these, just checking your Z velocity rather than your X velocity. So if my Z velocity is increasing, I'm jumping. If my Z velocity is decreasing, then I'm falling. If you have a transitional animation, one that goes between the moment you're in your jumping animation and your falling animation, you simply select the rule node and say use transitional animation. You select the animation that you want to play in here, and the animation will automatically not loop. It'll only play once, and you will have that transitional animation that will happen. Now, one problem that I've run into is transitional animations get skipped if the node that you're trying to move into isn't valid. So if you're going from falling to walking, you're not idle, then the transitional animation, like if you had a transitional animation here, it wouldn't play, it would get skipped. So a workaround that I've found for both that problem and for just if, let's say, for example, just to fully illustrate how this can get messy, is we add another animation state here for running. All right, and this animation goes back and forth. And then you can also transition from running back into idle. So you've got this here and this here, right? And then if you want to be able to transition out of your normal idle walk run into something else, like, for example, a climbing animation, right? So you've moved over to where there's a ladder and you want to start climbing. So you have an animation state here for climb, and you want to be able to transition in and out of that. But you also might be running at the time that you encounter the ladder, so you need to transition back and forth between these. And you also might just be idling at the bottom of the ladder. So we got transitions between these. And as you can see, that gets really messy really fast. So my workaround for all of that is get rid of all of these. Make sure I don't. And under idle, I instead, actually, we'll go back and rename it. This is going to be idle and walk and run, all in one animation state. So for the logic between these, it's going to be less clear because you're not going to have the separate nodes with the nice lines between them and everything. But now, everything that radiates out from this central node is greatly simplified, and you don't get your transitional animations getting cut off. So in here, what we can do is add in the biboolean selection. And so we have our idle and so we have the check that we had before. Where are we here? Owner. Get velocity. Break this out. So if it equals 0, we're idle. And if it doesn't equal 0, then we're moving. But what we can do is, out from here, do another biboolean. So if it's 0, we're idle. If it's not 0, it's assuming we're running. But then we could do another test here on our velocity of, say, greater than 200. Let's say that 200 is our normal walking speed. And so if it's higher than 200, we're not walking, we're running. And then we plug this result into here. So for this example, I don't have a walking animation, but run would be down here plugged into here. And from here, you would have your walking animation. And this would automatically handle your transitions between idle, walking, and running. And you would have a single central node that you could radiate out from for any of your transitions, like from climbing or dashing or any other animations that you're going to have not use jump nodes, but transitioning into and out of your idle, walk, and run states. Also, for ones that use jump nodes, you generally have, like in the case of your in-air one here, they're going to transition back in. So you know, if you have your crouch and oops, set up an animation state, you have your crouch animation here, and then you have your climbing animation here and such, rather than having them all radiating into and out of, you know, 3 different nodes or 2 different nodes. There's just the one. So this simplifies things greatly. And then depending on whether or not, let's say, for example, this is your climbing one, so it will go in both directions. But this one here is some other animation that isn't, you don't transition into. Again, it's using another jump node. And so this simplifies your graph by 2 or 3 times, depending on whether you have both walk and run. In your character blueprint, when you want to use one of those jump nodes to jump to an animation, you simply drag out your animation component, get animation instance, jump to node, type in the name of the jump node, in this case, in air. And state machine name, you only need to fill this in if you're using multiple state machines. As I mentioned before, if you had like a transformer or a werewolf or something that has multiple sets of animations. Otherwise, just leave this at none and it will just use the default state machine. That's all you need to do in order to use those jump nodes. So you can jump to in air, which will put you into jumping, which will transition into falling, which will transition back into your idle walk run. You could jump to like a dashing or crouching animation. You can transition back and forth like if for a climbing animation. And then in the case of like a single shot animation where you're only ever going to play it once and not transition anywhere, for example, a death animation that doesn't go anywhere. So you could have your jump node for death. This leads to an animation state for death. And it just ends there. If you have an animation that has transitions into and out of, you could set up a jump node which transitions into your first animation state, which you set the animation here. I'll just use the idle animation as an example. You simply turn off looping. Then it plays that animation. You then have your main animation that does have a loop. In the transition, we get time remaining for the animation that we have assigned. And when the time remaining equals 0, we transition into the next state. So this would jump in here when it's told to, play the transitional animation once, and then transition into the main animation that is going to loop. And then when you return to your default state, you could, if it also has a transition animation out of the idle animation. So for example, if we're doing a crouching animation, so this animation is the bending your knees and crouching down, plays once, then your idle animation while you're crouched, and then another animation for when you're standing up and unbending your knees. The other feature PaperZD adds is animation notifies. So we'll just close these up. I have one already set up here. So this is my animation source. I have all my animations, and if we go to the running animation, you hear that it's making footsteps. So let's pause this. So in each of the frames where the foot hits the ground, I've added in a sound notify, which you can do just by right-clicking. I'll right-click somewhere where there isn't one yet. Add notify, and there already has built-in functionality for particle effect and sounds. So I just say play sound, and then on the notify, you just select the sound, or in this case, it's a sound cue, so it plays 2 different footsteps back and forth, and it adds in a sound effect. Now, the other way of doing a notify is a notify function. So for example, with my attack, I have notifies on the frames where the weapon is hitting, here and here and here. And these notifies, if we go into the blueprint, we have a notify for weapon strike, which has the logic for processing the attack. So for setting up that type of notify, you just right-click, add notify, new notify, give it whatever name you want, and it will add a function for that notify in your animation blueprint. And then you can do with that whatever you want. This type of notify, though, is locked to this specific animation blueprint. It's not available in other animation blueprints. So if you have a notify that you want to be able to use anywhere, so share it between multiple animation blueprints or whatever, you can set it up, right-click, blueprint class, ZD, PaperZD anim notify. And this allows you to create a notify that can be used shared amongst all of your animation blueprints, not locked to just one animation blueprint. So that pretty much covers the basics on how to get started with PaperZD. As you can see, it adds so much functionality that is just missing when it comes to 2D flipbook animations in Unreal Engine. So it is incredibly useful, and it's a free plugin, so I highly recommend everybody just grab it. They have Discord channel, they have support. The links for those are on the market page. And give it a try and check it out. I highly recommend it. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. Have a good one.